Yoga isn't commonly taught as an important tool for spiritual development, especially to children who are visiting the temple. It's an integral part of our heritage, is what I'm understanding from your answers, but it isn't commonly taught. So children do go to the temple. We do participate in, events and prayers. Why do we not see more of yoga in temples other than there's a yoga teacher who's teaching and it's put up on a poster? So I've heard a guru say that Sri Krishna has said in the Gita to establish oneself in yoga. So what does that mean today? Because if I celebrate Jamnastami now and I go to the temple, we swing the julo, we have mithai, we celebrate Krishna's birth, but I'm not really getting that message that, we should establish oneself in yoga. So what does that mean today, and why is it not an integral part of our teachings to children?
I think that when we talk about temples, it's more about ritual, and when we talk about yoga, it's more about spirituality. And as the previous teachers pointed out, the two are, although related, one really transcends the other. And I think when we talk about spiritual growth and spiritual questioning, it is a very uncomfortable process. I think doing rituals is fun, like you mentioned. You go to Janmashtami and there is a chula, and you have other rituals associated with it, food, clothes, songs. It's more fun. And when we talk about practicing the principles of yoga, living a yogic way of life, it really involves you questioning yourself and putting yourself through this uncomfortable process of learning. So it requires more commitment, dedication, and you should be ready to be in this uncomfortable spot. So I think temples should encourage that, but I see why they don't, because they want, especially in the UK, first of all they want people to come and feel connected with the community, which is so important. I remember when I was in the UK as a student more than 10 years ago, I felt so happy that I could see other Indians at a temple. It was a very good day for me, because otherwise there were very few Indians where I live. So for me, it was a place of connection, especially in the UK. And in India, there are temples that are now encouraging yoga. So I have taught at some Indian temples, and they use their space for doing yoga postures.
Something my yoga teacher sort of has taught me quite a bit, which I think Kriti mentioned as well, or Krita mentioned, that yoga happens off the mat. So pretty much in our day-to-day interactions, and it's with that sort of yoga power, sort of we do our karmas. Now, Shri Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita this idea of performing karma as an offering to Krishna himself in what is known as bhakti power. And one of the examples these are all things that I've learned from great people, so I'm just sort of humbly vesting this knowledge. But if there's a childminder looking after a child, and there's actual a mother looking after a child, like say with Govinda as that example, then there's a lot more bhakti in that sort of later scenario, where you're kind of almost seeing the divine in your child. And I do believe that by that sort of Krishna is mentioning in the Gita, that be fixated upon Krishna or God or consciousness or the higher or your source, and then perform your karmas or your actions in the world. And that almost becomes that even though you're acting externally using your senses and indriyas in the world, because you're fixated to your source, you're effectively in yoga. That's my sort of humble understanding to that question. So whether that's in the form of, let's say, a karmakand ritual from the Vedas, like Janmashtami performing a rock the cradle of Krishna or doing an arati in a temple, or whether that's actually performing some asana or doing dhyana meditation, done in that context, it effectively becomes a yoga or a kind of a union as well. As to why the kind of mainstream Hindu temples in Britain haven't, I guess, sort of popularized yoga in that context, I believe it could be a range of reasons. One, it could be traditionally when Hindus arrived in the UK, they gelled more towards the sort of practices of archana and sort of japa and sort of the murti puja and that side of things. And now they're actually seeing by performing yogasanas, pranayama, meditation, not only are they kind of getting benefits from a health, well-being, a pragmatic point of view, peace of mind, but they're actually connecting to the source and asking deeper questions and sending out positive vibrations to everyone. Alongside, it's opening the doors to embrace diversity as well, where a lot of gurus will attract people from all sorts of backgrounds and sort of welcome that real harmonious and unified nature of yoga. I think there's something like 300 million yogi and yoginis in the world, and that wouldn't have happened if it was just closed doors in a place of worship, but actually kind of in the sort of battlefield as well. So
I come from more of a practice and an experiential sort of framework rather than a theoretical. So I don't have much insight into the scripture aspect of it. But in terms of yoga not being commonly taught in temples, I see that actually changing quite a bit. We have taught some at temples. I do see that, especially for children's programs, they're starting to bring them in. But generally, at the same time, yoga tends to transcend religion. So it is more of a spiritual practice. It's not faith-based, as we were talking about before. And because of this more scientific sort of approach to yoga, it hasn't been commonly used in temples. However, at the same time, temples traditionally were really places they were energy centers, and people would come and would sit and imbibe the energy within those centers. Now they've become very ritual centers. Now, generally, they say that one who's on the path of yoga, who is doing sadhana and working to experience things on different dimensions, doesn't need that actual ritualistic aspect. Those who are not doing the sadhana generally will go to temples and do the ritual part of it. So, well, of course, Bhakti Yoga is definitely part of yoga, and actually it's generally the fastest path to attainment, they say. It tends to be that temples have now become a place where people do rituals and just kind of hope to reach higher things in that way, whereas sadhana gives people the ability to sort of stay away from the rituals. It's generally not needed. So, but now at the same time, as I said, as yoga is becoming more scientifically backed up, we are seeing it in schools and, places of worship and in all sorts of religious places, actually. So that's a good sign.
The tradition of the temples started with the worship, the center of the worship. We can preserve the traditional Indian practices on these centers. So basically, temples are the culture centers with the prayer, with the worship. And philosophy, yoga is a philosophy, then definitely it's a part of the spirituality. And we have to understand what is a strong connection between the puja and the spirituality. First thing. And when we describe the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, and Patanjali mentioned in the first chapter, first part of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Ishwar Pranidhanadva. Ishwar Pranidhanadva, by the complete devotion to the Ishvara, we can achieve the Samadhi. We can achieve the yoga, basically, which has been explained by the Patanjali in the second sutra of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So we have to understand a strong connection between the spirituality and between the rituals. And when we connected both these strengths in the one direction, then we will be more capable to introduce the yogic practices. Basically, yogic practices, when we talk about, everybody is talking about the asanas and pranayama. These are the well-known yoga. So basically, when we practice these asana and pranayama with that spirituality, with that thought, and asana and pranayama will be also a meditation. It's not a physical exercise. When we inculcate with the spirituality, when you practice asana and pranayama with that spirit, then these practices will be a sadhana.
When I saw that question, I was reminded of one of the great teachers of yoga in the historical past, Allama Prabhu, who was the guru of Gorakshanath. And his position was, when he engaged in debates in Karnataka about 1,000 years ago, his position was that all puja, all initiation, all ritual, all beads, everything external to the religion was useless, worse than useless, because you tend to think if I chant enough mantras or do enough pujas, make enough offerings, then I've done it. And his point is that spirituality is entirely internal, and the externals just distract from that internal spiritual awakening. He was ultimately convinced, I think, or at least persuaded, that the external features like puja could be valuable, but only to the extent that they stimulate the internal awakening of it. With regard to yoga, situated in yoga, I think this comes from a verse of the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, yoga stah, be situated in yoga. And then he follows that up by, he says, yoga staha kuru karmani, perform your activities. And I think what's interesting about the Gita in particular is, more than other yoga texts perhaps, is that it establishes yoga not just as the meditational yoga, the postural yoga, but yoga as the way you live your life. So he's saying to Arjuna, situated in yoga, go out into the world and interact with the world with that developed state of consciousness. So Krishna therefore expands the term yoga to mean virtually any form of spiritual activity, as we've heard. I would also make the point about puja as well, and it was mentioned earlier, Ishvar Pranidhan, I think Dr. Joshi said that. The idea there as well is that, and this is what all the commentators on the Yoga Sutras make the point, the reason why Ishvar Pranidhan is emphasized by Patanjali is that it has the power to invoke the grace of Ishvar, so that yoga normally is a personal endeavor that we make to transform our consciousness. But the idea there is that Ishvar takes the leading role in transforming our consciousness for us. And that's in the Gita. It's very strongly there in the Shaivite teaching as well, that you make one little step of spiritual awakening and Ishwar will then take 3 or 4 steps towards you. So there's that idea as well. And that's the power of bhakti that again is emphasized in the Gita.
I mean, the temples are a reminder of the infinite consciousness. Yeah, sometimes we can go into such a tamas, such a dullness. But at least if you go to a temple, it will give you a reminder of that infinite consciousness. Yeah. So in the temple, what else happens? We are doing bhajans or singing. That happens. Yeah. And also, what else are we doing? There's pujas taking place. Now, why do we do a puja? Yeah. Well, actually, the sun, which when we look outside, is already doing a puja to us. So when we offer the arti at the temple, we are just saying thank you for the light. The sun is doing puja to us 24 hours a day. Okay. And also in a puja, we make an offering, could be some food, could be some water. It signifies the thank you for the food that you have given me. Yeah. And water also signifies love. I love you. If you love somebody, you will give them also flowers. So in a puja, there is also a flower present. So that is just a representation of your inner expression, born out of fullness. Yeah, puja, born. It's a fullness. You're coming out, and that's why you do that, because you love so much. Yeah. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions karma yoga, gnana yoga, and bhakti yoga. Yeah. So all these 3 yogas should be practiced, and it should be part of you. It should come naturally part of you. Yeah, as a day-to-day life. Like you could be doing a rangoli, a beautiful painting. You are immersed in that painting. You are in the state of yoga even there. Yeah, although the painter should do some asanas as well. Yeah. And then you mentioned the word by Krishna, established in the self. Yeah, is established one in the self. So what I would say here is that when one has a stress-free mind, a disease-free body, a quiver-free breath, a confusion-free mind, an inhibition-free intellect, trauma-free memory, and an ego that encompasses the entire humanity, you are established in the self. You are a yogi.